Some betrayals don't arrive like gunshots. They arrive like mileage on a dashboard. The sound I remember most from that year wasn't screaming. It wasn't arguments. It wasn't doors slamming or glass breaking. It was the soft clicking noise of our kitchen clock at 2:13 in the morning, while I sat alone at the table staring at a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour earlier. Tick, 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 every second sounding like another nail being driven into the coffin of my marriage. You spend enough years beside someone, you start memorizing the rhythm of their existence, the way they sigh before answering a difficult question, the way their shoes hit the hardwood when they're irritated, the exact pause between a lie and the smile that tries to hide it. My wife had started pausing more, and the house felt different. Not loud, not hostile, worse, careful, like two actors forgetting their lines in the middle of a play. Back then our kids were still little, 4 and 6, the kind of age where they still climbed into your lap during cartoons and asked questions about clouds and dinosaurs, and whether dogs dreamed when they slept. Kids notice everything. People think they don't. That was the first mistake. One afternoon my son sat at the kitchen counter swinging his legs while I made grilled cheese sandwiches. The smell of butter filled the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. And casually, the way children do when they unknowingly detonate a grenade in the middle of your life. He said, "Grandma's house again tomorrow." I looked over my shoulder. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Mom said we're sleeping there after lunch." The pan hissed. Butter burned black around the edges. I remember standing there staring at it too long. Because her parents lived 90 minutes away. 90. That's not a quick visit. That's a commitment. And apparently these visits were happening 2, sometimes 3 times a week. I asked my wife about it that night. Carefully. The TV glowed blue across the living room. Some sitcom audience laughed in the background while she folded laundry on the couch. "You've been taking the kids to your parents a lot?" Her hands kept folding, no more than usual. Another shirt folded. "You keeping track now?" The tone was light, almost playful. Almost. I watched her smooth wrinkles from one of our daughter's tiny shirts. Her eyes never met mine. And right there, something cold slid quietly into the room and sat between us. Not proof, not certainty, just instinct, the kind that settles in your bones before your mind can explain it. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. The mattress felt too small, the darkness too close. Beside me, she breathed peacefully, or pretended to. And sometime around 4 in the morning, while headlights drifted across the ceiling from passing cars outside, I realized something ugly. I was listening to my own wife breathe, the same way a man listens for movement inside a dark house after hearing glass shatter downstairs. That changes you. People don't talk enough about that part, not the affair itself. The transformation before the discovery, the moment love quietly mutates into surveillance, into pattern recognition, into suspicion, into silence. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, not because I wanted to become that man, because I already was. Every morning before work I'd glance at the odometer, then again at night. At first I told myself there'd be an explanation. There's always an explanation. Traffic, errands, helping family. But numbers don't care about excuses. 400 extra miles a week. 400. I sat in the garage one evening with the smell of motor oil and cold concrete filling the air while staring at those numbers under the dim yellow light overhead. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Still, motionless. Like if I didn't move, maybe the truth wouldn't either. Then came the sticky note. Funny how entire lives collapse over tiny things. A lipstick stain on a collar. A hotel receipt. A text message at midnight. Mine came on a faded yellow sticky note beside the family computer. Her AOL password, written in blue ink, just sitting there beside the keyboard like loaded ammunition left on a table. I stared at it for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My finger hovered over the mouse. There are moments in life where you can still turn around before the door opens. This was one of them, because deep down I knew, the second I logged in, whatever remained of my marriage would die in that chair. And maybe the cruelest part, a piece of me still hoped I was wrong. So I clicked, and there it was. Emails, long threads between her and an old college friend. I remember the glow of the monitor against the dark room. dust drifting through the light. My heartbeat thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. They joked about it. That's the part people never prepare you for. Not the sex. Not the secrecy. The laughter. The casual cruelty. She talked about meeting an old high school boyfriend. About hotel rooms. About sneaking around while I worked. And then, one sentence burned itself into my brain permanently. She mocked his wife for gaining weight after having kids. I just sat there, hands flat on the desk, completely still, because my wife had carried our children. Our children. And now she was sitting somewhere laughing about another mother's body like high school never ended. I printed every email. The printer sounded deafening in the dark. Page after page sliding out slowly like evidence in a murder trial. I kept waiting for rage, for some cinematic explosion. Instead, everything inside me became terrifyingly calm, like the moment before a tornado touches ground, and that scared me more than anger ever could. Once the illusion dies, every memory starts rotting from the inside. I hired a private investigator 3 days later. A friend of mine from high school had become a cop. We met at a diner off the highway where the coffee tasted burnt and the booth smelled faintly of cigarette. Smoke soaked into the fabric from the 80s. He listened quietly while stirring cream into his coffee. Didn't interrupt. Didn't offer sympathy. Just nodded once, then slid a napkin across the table with a name and number written on it. Guy named Ron, he said. Used to work missing persons. Good at finding things people pray stay hidden. The rain outside came down harder. I folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into my pocket. That night I called him. Ron sounded like gravel in human form. Short sentences. No wasted words. We met 2 days later in a parking lot outside a strip mall. He drove an old Buick with cracked leather seats and smelled faintly of stale coffee and aftershave. I handed him the emails. He flipped through them silently, then looked at me. You want confirmation, he said. Not a question. I stared out the windshield. I want truth. He nodded slowly. Truth costs more. And he was right. Because once truth enters your life, it starts charging interest immediately. Days passed. Then one morning Ron called. Got something. I met him in his office. Tiny place above a dry cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. Photos. Timestamps. Locations. My wife dropping our children at her parents' house. Then driving to meet him. Lunches. Parking lots. Cheap motels with flickering vacancy signs. Hours disappearing behind stained curtains while our children colored. Pictures at Grandma's kitchen table. Waiting for Mommy to come back. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. Ron kept talking. Professional, detached. She follows a routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays mostly. Motel off Route 8, guys married. 3 kids. 3 kids. I looked at the photos again. There he was. Bob. Middle-aged. Average-looking. Soft around the waist. The kind of guy you'd forget 5 seconds after meeting him. And somehow this man had walked through the center of my life wearing muddy boots. I drove home in silence. No radio. No thoughts. Just highway lines sliding beneath. The tires like an endless conveyor belt dragging me toward something irreversible. When I got home, my daughter ran to the door smiling. Daddy! She wrapped her arms around my leg. And for one terrible second, I almost broke apart right there in the hallway, because children have no idea when adults are carrying funerals inside their chest. That night, my wife asked if I was okay. I remember standing at the sink washing dishes, hot water steaming around my hands. You seem quiet lately. I kept scrubbing the same plate. Just tired. Silence. Then she walked closer. You working too much? I looked out the kitchen window into the dark backyard. No, I said softly. I think I just finally started paying attention. The room went still after that. You could feel the sentence hanging there between us like exposed wiring. And if you're still listening right now, subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this aren't really about revenge. They're about the moment ordinary people discover what they're capable of surviving. And trust me, this wasn't the part that destroyed him. Not yet. Revenge is rarely loud at first. Usually it begins in silence. I filed for divorce before confronting her. People question that later. Why not scream? Why not throw the photos on the table? Why not demand answers? Because by then, answers were worthless. I already knew enough. What mattered now was structure, protection. Control. My parents cheated on each other when I was young. I watched my childhood collapse, room by room, because two adults decided their impulses mattered more than stability. I remembered hiding in my bedroom while they screamed downstairs. The sound of plates breaking. The silence afterward. The silence was always worse. I swore my kids would never live through that chaos. So I became methodical. Lawyers, documents, custody arrangements. Every step quiet. Every movement precise. Meanwhile, Ron kept digging into Bob's life. And that's where fate handed me gasoline. Bob worked as vice president of sales for his father-in-law's company. Family business. Family house. Family money. Interesting arrangement for a man sneaking around motels in the middle of the afternoon. Ron leaned back in his chair one afternoon and lit a cigarette near the cracked office window. Guy built his whole life on borrowed ground, he muttered. I remember watching smoke drift toward the ceiling. Then I asked him for one more favor. He studied me carefully. What kind? I slid another envelope across the desk. Inside were copies of every photo, every email, every timestamp. I want his wife to know. Ron stayed quiet a moment, then nodded once. She deserves the truth. Exactly. That's the thing people misunderstand about revenge. The best kind doesn't require lies, just exposure. The truth destroys plenty on its own. The day my wife got served divorce papers at work, Ron paid Bob's wife a visit. I often wonder what that conversation looked like. Maybe she answered the door smiling politely. Maybe she offered coffee. Maybe she thought it was about business. Then this stranger sits down across from her and quietly unfolds her entire life onto the table piece by piece. Photos, hotels, dates, betrayal measured in paper and ink. Ron later told me she didn't cry immediately. Apparently she just stared at the photos for a long time, then asked one question. How long? That question carries enough weight to flatten a building. How long had everyone else been living in the truth while she was trapped inside a lie? Days later, the bomb went off. Bob's wife drained their joint account, took the kids, left. Then her father found out. That's when the floor disappeared beneath Bob entirely. Fired, evicted, humiliated. The details spilled into public. Court records afterward like blood, spreading through water. Arguments, restraining orders, police reports. At one point, Bob went to confront his wife at the house and things escalated, badly enough that her brother broke his nose. Jail entered the story not long after. Funny thing is, I never touched him, never threatened him, never screamed at him. I just opened the curtains and let daylight reach places that depended on darkness to survive, and daylight is ruthless. The loudest victories are often delivered in a whisper. My wife confronted me 3 days after being served. The house smelled like rain and wet coats. Evening light spilled weakly through the blinds. She walked into the kitchen holding the divorce papers with trembling fingers. You hired a lawyer? I kept pouring coffee. Yes. Her breathing turned shallow. You're really doing this? I placed the mug down carefully. You already did it. She looked at me like she wanted to say 1,000 things and none of them could survive outside her mouth. Then came anger. Predictable. You invaded my privacy. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because human beings will stand in the ashes of a burning house, holding gasoline and still complain about smoke. I leaned against the counter. You took our kids to your parents' house so you could sleep with another man in motel rooms. Silence. Heavy. Violent. She looked away first. And there it was. Confirmation. Not from emails. Not from photographs. From surrender. The human body tells the truth long before words do. Her shoulders dropped slightly, eyes unfocused, like someone realizing the performance has ended and the audience already went home. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I stared at the rain sliding down the window. Neither did I. That's the thing about betrayal. One person experiences excitement. The other experiences archaeology, digging through years of memories trying to figure out which parts were real. She cried eventually, quietly, hands over her face at the kitchen table. But something inside me had already crossed the river by then. No hatred, no screaming, just distance, cold, clean distance, like standing outside a burned building after the fire department leaves, nothing left to save. We finalized the divorce without turning it into war. I kept conversations limited to the kids. School schedules, birthdays, doctor appointments. Nothing more. People expected bitterness. But bitterness requires emotional investment, and eventually I stopped investing. Some people destroy themselves. You just stop standing in the way. I haven't spoken to my ex-wife in years now. Not really. The kids are adults. Good adults. That mattered most. Sometimes people ask if revenge made me feel better. Wrong question. Revenge implies rage. This wasn't rage. This was amputation. Necessary, precise, ugly, but necessary. As for Bob, he vanished. Last thing I heard, he left the state entirely. No social media, no business profile, nothing. Like the world itself swallowed him whole. His ex-wife, though? She survived. Took over her father's company after he retired. Raised the kids, built something stable from the wreckage. There's something strangely beautiful about that. Life doesn't always reward good people immediately, but eventually character compounds. So does cowardice. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Affairs aren't just sex, they're arrogance. It's two people convincing themselves they can build happiness from deception while expecting everyone else to carry the consequences quietly. But lies are heavy. Eventually somebody drops them. And when they hit the floor, they don't break neatly, they explode. I still remember that kitchen clock sometimes. Tick, tick, tick. Back when I sat alone in the dark wondering whether my instincts were lying to me. They weren't. Your soul notices betrayal long before your mind is ready to admit it. And if you've ever lived through something like this, if you've ever sat in a silent house feeling the air change around someone you loved, leave a comment below. Because the strangest part of betrayal isn't the heartbreak. It's realizing how many strangers understand the sound it makes.